The book of Judges is an exciting story of 6 cycles of judgment from the hand of God. A story that is designed to challenge the people of Israel and indeed us as well. That when we obey God, we can expect the blessing of God, and when we disobey God, the hand of God Himself will be against us. As we examine these 6 cycles, we discover that the pattern is the same every time. When the Israelites got away from God, forgot God, sinned against God, they ultimately fell under the judgment of God. An enemy came in, conquered them. Finally, they were broken, they repented, they cried to God for deliverance, and God raises up the deliverer, the judge, if you will, to judge the hearts of the people and ultimately to bring peace and to bring deliverance. Now, eventually, the story is designed to teach us that only God Himself is the righteous judge, that only God Himself can bring permanent peace and deliverance to our hearts and to our lives. And yet, time after time after time, Israel went back and repeated the same mistake again and again and again. Well, we're right in the middle of the story of Gideon, super chicken himself. Gideon, who is from the tribe of Manasseh, from the little village of Abiezer, and he's hiding in a wine press, trying to thresh wheat in a wine press, which is a contradiction of terms. And he's afraid the Midianites and the Amalekites are going to see him and steal the wheat and the barley. And all of a sudden, the angel of the Lord, dressed like a shepherd, comes along, sits down next to him, next to the oak tree, looks down at this ridiculous setting in the wine press, and shouts down to him, "Hey, mighty man of valor, what are you doing? The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Verse 12, underline, mighty warrior in chapter 6 of Judges. And Gideon said, well, if the Lord is with us, circle the word if in verse 13. Then why has all this happened to us? And where are all His wonders that our fathers told us about when they said He brought us out of Egypt and into the land, and we haven't seen any of His power around here? And the story of Gideon is constantly marked by doubt and uncertainty. His favorite terms are, God, show me a sign and give me a miracle to prove that this is really going to happen. Even putting out the fleece is an act of doubt. It's constantly if, fear, 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 fear. Here is super chicken, hiding down in the wine press, and the angel of the Lord says to him in verse 14, go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Well, they didn't have any strength. He's like, you got to be kidding. But Lord, Gideon said, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh. And it was. And I'm the least in my family. I'm from a pretty lousy tribe, and he was. And pretty lousy family, and he was. And I'm just a nobody. And God said, good, that's exactly what I'm looking for this time. You see, when I help your warriors win battles, they all want to take the credit for it. They think they did it. They don't realize I did it. I'm looking for you, pal, super chicken, a bumbling clod, a guy who's afraid of his own shadow. Because if I can get you to get the victory, they'll know I did it instead of you. Well, I just don't know. And he said, the Lord answered and said, I will be with you, and I will strike down all the Midianites together. Gideon replied, verse 17, if, there it is, circle it again, if I found favor in your eyes, and give me a sign. Underline the word sign. I need a miracle of some sort. So the angel of the Lord, who is obviously the Lord Himself and apparently Christ Himself, if He's the member of the Godhead who appears in visible form in the Old Testament, tells him, all right, go in the house, prepare an offering, and bring it out here and lay it on this rock. He brings the offering out and lays it on the rock. The angel of the Lord takes his shepherd's staff, touches the rock, and whoosh, fire shoots out of the rock and instantly consumes the sacrifice, and Gideon freaks out. It's a miracle. Ah! Fire out of a rock. Oh no, I've seen God. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Shut up. You're not going to die. Calm down, he tells him. You said you wanted a miracle? I gave you a miracle. Now look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to understand that I am going to bring peace this day to the nation and people of Israel. And I'm going to use you to do it. But before I do, there are a couple of things I want you to do. And he gives him in verse 25 some instructions. I want you to take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that's 7 years old, that's such a big deal to the Canaanites, to the Baal worshipers, and tear down your father's altar to Baal that your own father has on his Israelite farm, and cut down the Asherah pole beside it and build a proper altar to the Lord your God. Gideon, what in the world is your family doing? I want you to build an altar to Jehovah. I want you to tear down the Baal altar and cut down the grove, the Asherah poles. You've got paganism right here on your farm in the middle of the tribe of Manasseh. You're supposed to be the Israelites, the people of God, the people that believe in Jehovah. Now, if you want me to do a miracle on your behalf, if you want me to deliver your people from the Midianites, tear down that Baal altar, cut down those Asherah poles, and build an altar to the Lord God Jehovah. And the Bible says Gideon was like, I could get in trouble doing that. Tear down the Baal altar? Well, if you say so. Verse 27, so Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him, but he did it at night, not in the daytime. Why? Because he was afraid of his family and of the townspeople. These are Israelites. Religious compromise leads to moral confusion, leads to civil catastrophe. Over and over it shouts to us from the pages of the book of Judges. Here they are as far away from God as they can get. And they go in at night and tear down the Baal altar and build an altar to the Lord Jehovah, a totally different kind of an altar. And in the morning when the people got up and realized that the Baal altar was torn down, they were angry, Israelites. They said, who did this? And one of the servants apparently squealed and said, well, Gideon did it. He told us to do it. And they ran to his father's house, to Joash's house, and beat on the door and said, bring out your son Gideon right now. Why? We're going to kill him. Kill him? What did he do? He tore down the Baal altar. And his father's shocked. You did? Gideon? You tear down the Baal altar? Well, yeah, I did. Well, good boy. I can't believe it. You finally did something worthwhile in your life. And his father looked at the men of the city and rebuked them, proud of his own son, probably realizing in his own sense of a guilty conscience the Baal altar shouldn't have been there in the first place, that that was an act of compromise in the first place. And he said, well, if Baal is a god, let Baal plead for himself. You don't need to kill him. Let Baal strike him dead if he's really a god. Let Yerub Baal. Let Baal Yerub. Let Baal plead. And so his nickname became Jerubbaal in verse 32. Underline that. Let Baal plead his own case for himself. Well, he couldn't. Now the passage moves on and tells us in verse 33, now all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other eastern people joined forces and crossed the Jordan River. Here they come again. And they encamped in the valley of Jezreel. And the Spirit of the Lord was on Gideon, and he blew a trumpet and rallied the people of his hometown, the Abiezrites, to follow him. He sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, the northern tribes, and rallies them together to say, man, the Midianites and the Amalekites are coming. We got to go out and fight these people in the valley of Jezreel. The Bible goes on to tell us that the Midianites and the Amalekites were camped by the hill of Moreh that you see in the distance. That Gideon's men were all the way this side of the picture at the well of Harod. Not Herod, Harod, trembling in the Hebrew language. Now here comes Super Chicken with his army of farmers and volunteers to the well of trembling. Well, he panics about now.
I blew a trumpet and rallied an army, and they're trying to follow me. I don't know if I can do this.
Verse 36, Gideon said to God, if, there it is again,
if you'll save Israel by my hand, as you've promised, well, look, I'm going to place a wool fleece in the threshing floor that I don't use. And if there's dew on the fleece and it's dry on the ground, then I'll know it's a miracle and a sign from you that you really want me to do this. And so he puts out the fleece.
Now, I know we use the term, I put out the fleece to test the will of God, etc., and we don't mean any harm by that, but biblically, technically, in context, putting out the fleece was an act of doubt. He did this with an if on his tongue. If you're really going to save us. And so God, patient with him, sends the dew on the lamb's wool, on the fleece, but not the ground. You know, when the dew settles, it settles on everything. Everything gets wet. And he realizes,
man, God did it, didn't he? And then he said, well, don't be angry with me, but could I go for 2 out of 3? You know, it's like flipping quarters. Heads it's your will, tails it's not. Oh, I got the wrong answer. Can we flip again? What if I put the fleece out one more time, and this time it's dry on the fleece and wet on the ground? And God said, all right, fine, let's get it over with. And the next day, same thing. God intervenes again. The fleece is dry, the ground is wet, Gideon is stuck, and he's like, well, I guess I got to lead this army to some kind. I better get my sword and get going here, see what I can do. Now, go to chapter 7. In the 7th chapter, it says, early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his men encamped in the spring of Harod. Underline that, trembling. And the camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. It's miles away. It's not like they're right on top of them. And the Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. Otherwise, Israel will say they did it in their own strength. Now I want you to go and announce to the people and say, anybody that is trembling with fear, yeah, that's me, turn back and leave Mount Gilead. And so 22,000 men left and only 10,000 remained. Now, when you read the whole chapter, he's got 32,000 men. But the Bible says there's 130,000 Midianites and Amalekites. He's still hopelessly outnumbered 3 or 4 to 1. And God says to him, I think you got too many men. Go ask him how many are afraid. Well, anybody with any sense facing death knows they're afraid. And 22,000 men raise their hand and go, yeah, I'm afraid. This is not a professional army of soldiers. These are volunteers. These are men that have left their farms to try to go and drive the enemy out of the land because one man is trying to lead them. And 22,000, well, if you're afraid, God said you could leave. And they left. It's kind of like Braveheart losing his army. Everybody's scattering away from him here. And there are only 10,000 left. And then the Lord said, you still have too many men. Take them down to the spring at the bottom of the hill. Now, I've been there and stood there. I mean, it's huge. There's plenty of room for people to drink. The Israelis today have turned the thing into a swimming pool and a national park and everything else, but there is a natural spring that bursts right out of the rocks at the bottom of that hill, and he tells him, let him go down to the water, and everybody that gets down on his knees and sticks his face in the water and sucks the water up in his mouth, put the suckers to one side. But everybody that scoops the water up and laps the water like a dog, set them to the other side. In other words, I want you to divide the lappers from the suckers, if you will, and pull them out of line. Well, it turns out that there are only 300 men that lapped. Now, I've heard every kind of explanation. These were the best, these were the brightest, these were the smartest. They were looking for the enemy. The enemy's miles away. The enemy's not even right there yet. The old Jewish rabbis said these were the guys that were too afraid to admit they were afraid. They were so afraid they couldn't get their hand up. Would you raise your hand if you're afraid? It won't go up. These guys are still afraid, and God finally says, all right, tell everybody who knows they're afraid to leave. Tell all the people that sucked up the water, all the suckers, to leave. I'm going to save Israel by you, Super Chicken, and the lappers. That's it. By now, Gideon himself is freaked out. I've only got 300 men left to attack the enemy. This must be a mistake. No, it's not. Now, I tell you what, I want you to go down tonight. Tonight. I want you to go down to the edge of the Midianite camp in the dark. In the dark, okay. And you're going to hear something that's going to encourage your heart. Well, I need to hear something like that, all right? So we read that now the camp of Midian lay below them in the valley. Verse 9. And during the night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up, go down to the camp. I'm going to give it into your hands. And if you're afraid to go, take your servant Phurah with you.
So he took his servant Phurah with him because he was afraid to go. And afterwards you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Phurah went down to the outposts of the camp. Now, he goes on to tell us that when they got there in verse 13, Gideon arrived just as one man was telling the other soldier a dream that he had had the night before. And he overhears this. The guy said, man, I'm scared to death. What are you afraid of? I had this bad dream last night. What was it? This cupcake came rolling down the side of the hill. This Hostess Twinkie, this barley cake, and it knocked over all the tents. What do you think it is? And his friend said, it's the sword of the Lord. And Gideon, I've heard about him. He's coming after us. He's going to kill us. Gideon can't believe his ears. Super chicken. They're afraid of me. Nothing will encourage a coward more than knowing that the enemy is more afraid of you than you are of him. He can't believe it. Come on, Phooey, let's go. Get back up the hill. Get the soldiers. Let's get ready to attack. Let's get the battle on. They're afraid of us. Oh, he takes such great encouragement, such great heart in all of this. They charge back up the hillside, and God says to him, all right, now wait a minute. Here's what we're going to do. I want you to divide the group into 3 sections, verse 16. I want you to place a trumpet in everyone's hand, an empty jar, and a torch. And I want you to put 100 men over here and 100 there and 100 here, kind of surrounding this valley, and we're going to smash the pottery to simulate noise and the clash of arms. We're going to wave the torches, and we're going to blow on the trumpets, and we're going to shout the sword of the Lord and Gideon. And guess what, Gideon, super chicken, we're going to scare the enemy away.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
They're already scared. That's a good idea. I think we can do it. And all of a sudden, the guy who has the dream about the barley cakes suddenly equips the army. Let's go and attack the enemy right now. Now you say, Ed, how did all this work? Well, remember, in ancient times, you normally would carry a sword in one hand. You'd carry a shield in your other hand. If you've got to carry a sword in one hand and a torch in the other hand, you don't have a shield. Or if you got a shield, you don't have a sword. So everybody carrying a torch is missing something. Everybody carrying a trumpet to blow the trumpet is missing a piece of equipment. So when they look up and they see 300 torches, they're assuming they're not going to give everybody a torch. There must be 100,000 of them up there. You know, in those ancient battles, they'd have a little fife and drum corps out in front, a few people making some noise on some musical instruments, etc. You don't have a whole army of musicians. The whole point in this story is that the 300 torches causes them to say, they've hired the Egyptians to come against us. We're being attacked by a massive army. And it was just a few guys waving the torches around, blowing on the trumpets. There's a famous battle in the history of England and Scotland, the Battle of Bannockburn. The Scots are losing the battle. The English are overwhelming them. It comes right out of the history of the time of Sir William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, etc. And just as the Scots are about to lose, back at the battle camp of the Scots, some of the old men that were left behind to take care of some of the young boys that were there told the boys, grab the bagpipes, grab the drums, march to the battlefront. We're not going to let our men lose this battle without us making an attempt. Then it was a dry, hot, dusty day, and as this handful of musicians makes their way over the hill and stirs up the dust playing the bagpipes, the English army panicked and fled, and the Scots won this great victory at Bannockburn. It's happened throughout history, and it happens here as well. He scares them away. He frightens the daylights out of them. 300 trumpets and 300 torches, they think means thousands and thousands of people. They wake up in the middle of the night in total confusion, it says. The Midianites and the Amalekites who speak different Arab dialects are running into each other in the dark, and it's, man, there's somebody there. Off with your head. Oh, whoops, it's my roommate. And by morning, they have annihilated themselves. They have been put to flight, and it's just Gideon and his men making a bunch of noise, who charge down off the hill and chase them through the valley of Jezreel, the valley of Armageddon. They're chasing them all the way back to the desert. And then the other tribes want to get in on the victory, like, hey, we're winning, come on, everybody come. And Israel wins the victory, chases them out, and they never in biblical times ever came back. Super Chicken becomes a superhero, because he learned finally to believe God, to trust God, that God is greater than the enemy. What does the New Testament tell us? Resist the devil and he will do what? Flee from you. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And we have a perfect illustration of that in the story of Gideon and his victory over the Midianites and the Amalekites with the trumpet and the pitchers and the lamps. We move from the story of Gideon now and the victory that is won ultimately to an interlude of some lesser judges that are named here. Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, for whom Elon College is named, Abdon, etc. None of them play a significant role in any of the cycles at this point, and we don't know how long they ruled necessarily, whether they were sequential or whether they overlapped or whether they were local judges. But what we do discover is that when we come to cycle number 5, Jephthah is the main character, and Jephthah has to go out and battle the Ammonites from Ammon, from Jordan. And we reach that 5th cycle of all of these cycles in the story of Jephthah and Jephthah's vow that he has to make unto the Lord. Take your Bible and go to the 11th chapter of Judges. Notice what it says in chapter 11, verse 1. Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior. Underline his name, Jephthah. Underline mighty warrior. This guy's not Super Chicken. This guy's superhero, super warrior. But he's got a super problem. His father was Gilead. His name was the name of the territory. But his mother was a prostitute. And Gilead's wife bore him several sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away and said, you're not going to inherit our father's farm and our father's money. You're the son of a strange woman. You're the son of a woman who's a stranger to the covenant of marriage, to this harlot, to this prostitute. And they drove him away, and he fled to the land of Tob, way up beyond the Golan Heights toward Syria. And a group of adventurers, one translation puts it, gathered around him. He gathered a bunch of bandits, basically, a little army of rogues and outcasts that followed him. But sometime later, the Ammonites on the east bank made war on Israel. Gilead is also on the east bank. And they went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob and said, come back and be our commander and fight the Ammonites. And Jephthah said, I thought you guys hated me and you didn't want me to be in charge. Well, you know, you're a pretty good warrior and a fighter, and we need all the help that we can get. And he said, all right, if you'll let me lead Gilead, I will come back and bring my men and my warriors with me, and I will defend you. Outcast desperately want to be reconciled, and he wanted reconciliation with the people of Gilead that had rejected him. And so he comes back ready to lead them in this battle, recalled by the elders. Now, when we look at the cycle, the oppressor, the Ammonites from Transjordan, invade Gilead, the northern region of the eastern bank. How long the oppression lasts is unclear. And how long the period of rest is apparently is 6 years, although some add the dates of the other judges into here to come up with 23. But the judge is Jephthah the Gileadite, the outcast from the land of Tob, who is recalled by the elders of Gilead, who say, I don't care who you are or what you've done. We need your help. You get back here right now and help us defeat these enemies. And so he goes out into the battle, and he tries, first of all, to negotiate. In verse 12, he sends messengers on ahead to the Ammonites and says, look, we don't need a war here. Come on. You know that this territory we're arguing over in this dispute has always belonged to the Israelites. In verse 22, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, from the desert to the Jordan, that this piece of territory has always been Israelite territory between the Arnon River and the Jabbok River, tributaries of the Jordan River. This is our land. It's on the east bank, yes, but it's always belonged to us, and your land is south of that. And if you'll leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. But they wouldn't do it. They said, no, we're going to take all these lands back because these belong to us before you Israelites ever got here. So here they are over 3,000 years ago arguing over the land just like they still are as to what belongs to who, etc. And finally, Jephthah gives up on the negotiations and he turns to God and says, you settle it. I'm turning it over to you. Let the Lord, verse 27, the judge, decide the dispute. Circle the Lord the judge. Up till now, all the judges are human beings. Up till now, all the judges have some odd thing about them, some quirk, some oddity, some uniqueness, some inadequacy, but not this one. He said, the Lord the judge, you're the only judge. You're the real judge. You're the only one that can straighten this out. You settle this. You settle the dispute. He appeals to God. Then verse 29 says, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. Remember that. And he crossed over Gilead and Manasseh through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow. Circle the word vow in verse 30. And he said to the Lord, if you'll give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever, it's neutral in the Hebrew, comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's. They lived usually on the upper floor of the house, kept the animals on the first floor. He's thinking that if a lamb or a goat or some animal comes out of the house when I come home, it will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. That offering where you kill the animal, shed its blood, throw the dead carcass on the fire, and burn it up and consume it completely unto the Lord. Now, some scholars have pointed out that the phrase, and it will be a burnt offering, can also just as legitimately in Hebrew be translated, or it will be a burnt offering. Because there are some things that might come out of his house to greet him that would not be qualified to be a burnt offering. What if his dog ran out of the house to meet him? You can't sacrifice a dog to God. What if his cat came out? You can't sacrifice a cat to God. Therefore, we got to read the passage with a full understanding of all that it is implying, because what goes wrong is when he comes back in victory in verse 34, his daughter runs out to meet him, thrilled that her father has won the victory. His only daughter, his only child, and he tears his clothes and said, oh no, I've made this vow unto the Lord, I cannot go back, I cannot take the words back. And she says, well, Dad, if you made the vow, keep the vow. Now I think if he was going to kill her, I don't think she would have said, well, yeah, well, go ahead with it, whatever. The scholars have wrestled with this for years, centuries. There are basically two views as to what happened here. Either number one, she was killed and sacrificed, that he did unto her according to the vow. But it doesn't make sense to me that if you send a man out to defeat the Ammonites, who are known for child sacrifice, that you turn right around and your victor kills his daughter and sacrifices his daughter to the Lord, which is contrary to the law of Moses when he was filled with the Spirit. Would he have actually done that? And yet if you pick up Bible commentaries, you'll see that half the commentators say, yeah, he did it. This was a tough time. People were confused. They didn't always do the right thing. Or the second view is he dedicated her as a virgin for a lifetime of service, unmarried, with no children, to serve the Lord at the tabernacle, a kind of a Jewish nun, if you will. The Jewish people in the time of the judges sometimes did that. We'll see that in the story of Samuel. His mother gives him to Eli the priest to serve the Lord at the tabernacle. And so the debate goes on between the two views. Either he literally went ahead and killed her, or he dedicated her, either it will be a burnt offering or it will be the Lord's. I'll give it to the Lord in whatever way is appropriate to do that. And she told him, well, go ahead, Dad, but I tell you what, give me, verse 37, 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends because I will never marry. Now, if she's going to die, she'll never marry. But if she's dedicated as a virgin for life, she's never going to marry either. Now, that was considered a real tragedy in ancient Middle Eastern Jewish times. You have to perpetuate the seed of your father. The family line must go on. And they lament the fact that she is a virgin for life. And it was a custom in Israel in those days that they lamented, it says in the King James, commemorated in the New International, celebrated in the New American Standard, that they celebrated this. Why? Because here is a triumph of virtue, that he keeps his promise even though it hurts. Not that he does something terribly wrong. I don't think he killed the girl. I think it contradicts everything in the story. If he's filled with the Spirit and he's led of God and he sincerely, honestly makes the vow unto the Lord, and anything else that wasn't a sheep or a goat or a bull that would not have been an adequate sacrifice, could not have been sacrificed and would have been simply given to the Lord's service in some way, I think it is more obvious that he gave the girl to be a servant of the Lord, but to never marry and never have children. And that was what they wept over. That's what they sorrowed over. Even in victory in some of these stories, there are notes of defeat or discouragement. We move now to the final cycle. Cycle number 6 in our story, the story of Samson and the Philistines. Those Greek warriors, those sea peoples that settled on the coast of Israel. The Philistines came in mass in about 1200 BC, 1100. By 1000 BC, they were threatening the very existence of the nation of Israel. We'll see several stories about Samson, Samuel, Saul, David, Jonathan. They're all dealing with the Philistines during this period of time. The story begins in the 13th chapter of Judges. Notice what it says. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And there was a certain man of Zorah, a little small town, named Manoah. He was of the clan of the Danites, that is, the tribe of Dan, just like the tribe of Benjamin are the Benjamites, etc. This tribe of Dan was the weakest tribe Israel had. They were not able to maintain their possession and their inheritance, and they eventually lost it to the Philistines. We'll read later in Judges, they vacated the territory, moved far to the north, gave up on God completely, turned away from God, began to worship idols, became an apostate tribe. They're not even listed among the 12 tribes in the book of Revelation in the New Jerusalem. And in the irony of God, he raises up the strongest man that ever lived from the weakest tribe that Israel ever had. Samson is going to come from the tribe of Dan. And then the angel appears and says, your wife will have a son, but see to it that you drink no wine or fermented drink, that you do not eat any unclean thing. Because you will conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor may be used on his head, for the boy is to be a Nazirite, set apart, which is what Nazir means in Hebrew, a holy man, dedicated to God from his birth, and he will begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. He won't finish the job, but he'll get it started. He'll begin the deliverance. I want you to make sure that you understand the seriousness of the situation, he tells the parents. God is going to give you a miraculous child with unusual abilities, a Nazirite, dedicated to the Lord. Now, in the story, we have several problems initially. The invasion of the sea peoples is putting pressure on the Israelites, and they're moving further inland all the time and displacing the tribe of Dan. The oppressor, the Philistines. The oppression lasts for 40 years. Afterwards, there is perhaps a period of 20-year rest during the judgeship of Samson, and the judge is to be named Samson, Shimshon in Hebrew, sunny, bright one, sunny boy, if you will. You come to the end of the chapter, and it says in verse 24, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Samson, Shimshon. And he grew, and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him at times in the camp of Dan. They don't even have a town left. They're in a kind of a refugee camp between Zorah and Eshtaol, real places. So even as a child, this boy is moved by the Spirit of God apparently to do unusual feats of strength. I don't know if he went around and raised up the back end of wagons or what he did, but it's evident that this sense of the empowerment of the Spirit of God was evidenced in his life even as a child. Now, we don't know exactly his age, but by the time we get to the 14th chapter, he's somewhere around 20. We know a little bit about his family background. His father is Manoah. His tribe is Zorah. His town is Zorah. His tribe is the tribe of Dan. His name is Samson, Shimshon, Sonny Boy, etc. We know that he's taken a Nazirite vow. He cannot touch or eat anything unclean, according to the Nazirite vow. Nazir, to be separated or set apart or dedicated to God. Secondly, he can't drink wine or any intoxicating drink, telling us that the wine was intoxicating. He can't have it. And thirdly, he was not to cut his hair, ever. So the long hair is merely the outward indication of his inward dedication and devotion to God. The challenge of the Nazirite vow, you don't touch and eat unclean things, which includes dead things. You don't drink any wine. You don't ever cut your hair. You are set apart as a unique person, a holy man unto God. Now, normally, we would expect this person to be intensely spiritual, not intensely powerful, but this is the gift that God gives him of superhuman strength. And then we look at the outline of his life, and it can be divided up into his experience with three women. The woman at Timnath in chapters 14 and 15, the woman he attempts to marry, the harlot at Gaza that he becomes involved with in a one-night stand, and then Delilah of the valley of Sorek, who ultimately delivers him into the hand of the Philistines. Here he is dealing with Greeks who were famous for their Greek tragedies that they wrote as plays, and the whole story of Samson reads like a great Greek tragedy. In chapter 14, he went down to Timnah, and there he fell in love with a young Philistine woman. And he went back to his parents and said, "Wow, man, you ought to see those Philistine girls. Woo, they're better looking than our girls are." And his parents are upset, saying, "Why can't you marry one of our people?" And he said, "Are you kidding? I don't want a girl from our youth group. Have you seen those girls? This girl, I met this Philistine girl at a bar down there. Woo, she's something else." And everything's wrong with the story. Here's the guy that's supposed to be dedicated to God with a wandering eyeball, chasing the hot babe that he met down on the Philistine territory. He apparently, wherever the border is between what had been the tribe of Dan and the Philistines, people are crossing over the border, having some kind of social interaction with each other. He falls in love. He wants to marry the girl. He's trying to force his parents to agree to this. You got to go down and make the arrangements. This is the ancient Middle East. And work this out for me. And his parents go on ahead. He lingers behind in a vineyard. Now, what grows in a vineyard? Grapes. And I think he's standing there about 18 or 20 years old thinking, "Man, grapes, look at these grapes." 20 years old. Never had a grape. By the time he's about to reach out and grab one, all of a sudden a lion attacked him. Roar! A young lion roared against him in verse 5, and the Spirit of God came on him, and he ripped him in half. Throw the carcass down on the ground. You know, sometimes when we're about to do wrong, God will send an interruption. You know, like your girlfriend's father flashing the lights saying, "All right, it's time to go home," some of that, etc. He sends the interruption just in time to try to get through to us, but we don't always pay attention to it. And he goes on his way and forgets about the whole thing. Later on, they come back to finalize the marriage. And again, parents go on ahead to make sure everything's okay. He lingers behind again, and he turns aside in verse 8 to the vineyard. He thinks, "There's that vineyard. That old dead lion's over there somewhere. I wonder what happened to that thing. And when he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, a swarm of bees had made a hive in it, and there was honey in it. See, it doesn't rot there in that part of the world. It dehydrates like a hollow log. And the bees have a hive inside the dead carcass of the lion, and Samson reaches in and scoops out some of the honey and ate it. Problem? Violation of the first stipulation of the vow. Don't touch or eat anything unclean. Anything dead is considered unclean. It shows the character weakness. I didn't care. He went on. In fact, he even gave some of the honey to his parents, but he didn't tell them where it came from. I heard a guy say one time, yeah, he was so humble. No, it had nothing to do with humble. He didn't want to get in trouble. It's like, yeah, good honey. Hey, Mom, better not tell him I got out of a dead lion. Whatever. Then he no sooner violates the first stipulation of the vow, he violates the next stipulation of the vow. Verse 10, his father and his mother went down to see the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so was the custom for the bridegrooms. The word feast in the Hebrew language is mishteh. It is a drinking feast. He has to sponsor the booze at the wedding, if you will. And if everybody's drinking at the wedding, and we know historically the Philistines were notorious drinkers, they left behind wine craters, beer jugs, and all kinds of things in their material remains, it's very unlikely that he didn't drink at the wedding. He's probably getting drunk at the wedding along with everybody else. And finally, he proposes to them this riddle, tries to make fun of them, tries to expose. If you've ever been to a wedding between a believer and an unbeliever, you can feel what's going on in this story. The tension of the relatives. They just don't all fit, don't all get along. His parents are brokenhearted. He's marrying this unsaved Philistine girl. What's the matter with him? And he's up there trying to make fun of them all, doing stupid things. You know, I said, well, let me tell you a riddle. Out of the eater came forth something to eat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. They don't know what he's talking about. He's talking about finding honey, sweetness, in the eater, in the lion. Well, whoever found honey in the lion? Nobody. They don't know what it means, and so under pressure then they went to his wife secretly and said, what did you marry this guy for? It's a 7-day reception. You have the ceremony on day 1. There's a 7-day reception. At the end of the 7 days, you finally take the girl home and she becomes your wife, and you go on a 7-day honeymoon. While they're still at the reception, they come to the girl and say, if you don't find out what this is all about, we're going to kill you. We're going to burn your father's house down with you in it. Nice bunch of relatives, great wedding guests. So she goes to him and says, tell me, Sammy, what is the riddle all about? Let me know the answer to the riddle. You haven't told me. Samson's wife, verse 16, threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me and don't really love me. You've given a riddle to my people and you haven't even told me the answer. Well, he said, I haven't even told my father or my mother. Well, that was a mature thing to say. So she cried the whole 7 days of the feast. And on the 7th day, finally he told her, because she nagged him day after day. There's great psychological lessons in the Old Testament. She just turned the tears on day after day after day. Sammy, tell me the riddle, tell me the answer. You don't love me. All right, I found honey in a lion. Boom, she runs out at the end of the 7th day and says, he found honey in a lion. Right as the sun's going down, he's about to win the bet. They say, well, let's take one more shot at this. What's stronger than a lion? And what's sweeter than, say, honey? And all of a sudden he realizes she told him the answer. He got mad. He said, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you would not have figured out my riddle. Guy's only been married for 7 days and he's calling her an old cow already. And he got mad. He left. He went down to the coast to Ashkelon, to one of those 5 major Philistine cities. He's got to give them 30 brand new suits of clothes. So he just killed 30 guys, took their clothes and brought them back and threw them down and went home mad. And her father thought he hates her. He doesn't want her. So he married her off to the best man. Verse 20, Samson's wife was given to the friend that attended him at the wedding. The friend of the bridegroom is what we call the best man. You can't leave the girl standing at the altar without a husband in ancient times. So if the husband backs out, the best man has to marry the girl. That's why you call him the best man. If you're living back then and your buddy said, you want to be the best man at my wedding? You say, you got a picture or something? I could meet her. Maybe I might get stuck with her here. He ends up marrying the girl off to the best man. Samson comes back about a month later. He's calmed down, said, all right, where's my wife? And her father says, I thought you didn't want her. I gave her to somebody else. He blows up. This is the incident where he catches the jackals and the foxes and lights their tails on fire and sets them loose in the field and burns down the vineyards and the orchards and the wheat fields and destroys the whole economy of the town. And the people got mad and chased after him, and the Spirit of God came on him, and eventually, it says in verse 15 of chapter 15, he took the jawbone of a donkey, grabbed it, and struck down 1,000 men with it. Unbelievable feat of strength. But even in the success is a note of defeat. The jawbone is from a dead animal. It's unclean. Samson wins the battle, loses the girl. They burned her house down with she and her father in it anyhow. 20 years pass at this point in the story. Samson walks away, the Hebrew Hulk, if you will. The attitude of the Philistines is those Israelites don't have much of a country, and they certainly don't have much of an army. But they got this one guy. Man, you mess with him and you're dead meat. He's unbelievable. I don't know how we're ever going to capture him. But the devil knew if I keep working at that weakness, sooner or later I'll hook it. And all of a sudden, the whole future of Israel and their success as a nation hinges on one man. He can't even raise an army. He doesn't even have any followers. He's out there all by himself. He is in a situation where you have to ask yourself, what in the world is going to happen? Now, at this point, we're told at the end of chapter 15, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Mark the 20 years. Apparently, 20 years go by in this story here, from the marriage to the Philistine girl that ended in disaster and her death, that for 20 years, apparently as a single man, he just sort of wanders around wherever he wants to go. And everybody's like, get out of his way, man. Leave him alone. Go to chapter 16, verse 1. One day, Samson went down to Gaza. Now Gaza is on the southern end of the Philistine coast. He's way deep into Philistine territory, like nobody's going to mess with him. And here's the tragedy. He saw there a prostitute. He went in and spent the night with her. And the people of Gaza said, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place where he was lying in wait all night, and they said, man, lock the gates. Lock him into the town. We'll wait here, and when he gets up in the morning to leave, we'll pounce on him and get him, and we'll kill him. It's 20 years have gone by. He's 40 years old. Now he's getting old. We can get him. But verse 3 said, Samson lay there till midnight only, and in the middle of the night he got up. I think he got under conviction and thought, what in the world am I doing here? I'm not supposed to be here. I gotta get out of here. He leaves in the middle of the night, and he comes to the gate, and the gate's locked. And the Bible says that he ripped the gate right off of its hinges. He tore the two posts and the bar and all, and lifted them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. He literally comes to the gates, would have weighed about 4,000 pounds or more, and he rips them right off their iron hinges, puts them on his shoulders, and carries off the gates of Gaza. You say, what about the guys that were going to try to stop him? You want to stop a guy who can carry 4,000 pounds of gates? I don't think so. And again, God's trying to say to him, pay attention, listen to me, narrow escape, bud. Don't push the edge. But he does. Sometime later, verse 4, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Underline valley of Sorek. Circle the name Delilah. That's the same valley where he lived. The little town of Zorah is up at one end across from Beth Shemesh, the Jewish town. You go down the valley of Sorek to the west into the Philistine territory. And this woman's different. This is not a young, naive girl. This is not a girl that doesn't know the score. This is an older woman. I see her as a kind of a Joan Collins type, kind of a nasty old creature. Still good looking, but she's got a heart like cement. And the lords of the Philistines, there are 5 of them for the 5 cities of the Pentapolis came and said to her, each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver if you can find out his secret. Nobody's this strong. What's this guy all about anyhow? If you can find the secret, we'll give you 5,500 pieces of silver. By modern calculations, that'd be over $1 million. She's going to be a millionaire. You want to be a millionaire? Find out the guy's secret, we'll give you the money. So they enter into this tragic lover's game where she starts asking him, Samson, verse 6, tell me the secret of your great strength. And I kind of say you're like from South Philistia. Samson, you big old hunk, you. Look at all those muscles you have. Well, you're just so strong. I wonder how little old me could just tie you up and make you helpless. And he's thinking, well, I need to just go right ahead and try or whatever. And tragically, they begin to play the deadly game. Tie me up with leather thongs or bowstrings, and I'd be as weak as anybody else. And he just breaks them loose. Tie me up with, ropes that have never been used before, and I'd be as weak as anybody else. And he breaks them. And then finally he says, well, I got a lot of hair. I've been wondering about that. 7 braids, it says. He wore it braided up to get it out of his way. 7, this guy was kind of like, he had the locks. And he said, if you unweave part of that and just sort of wove it there into your loom and clamped it down, it hurts when you pull your hair. I'd be as weak as anybody else. And even then, when she woke him up, he snaps his head and rips it right out of the loom and ruins the loom and destroys the sewing machine. And then she turns it on. You've ruined my sewing machine. Look what you have done, you big beast, you. Well, I'm sorry. I love you. I don't. No, you don't love me. Get your hands off me. Stay away from me. And she turns on the tears. Hey, hello. Didn't you learn this lesson 20 years earlier? And she starts to cry and she starts to nag and finally goes, all right. I'll tell you. Yeah, what could go wrong? Plenty, as we will see in the next lesson.